Hello, and welcome back to That AuDHD Teacher. I'm Emily, an early childhood teacher sharing stories, science, and honest conversations about living with an AuDHD brain. So, whether you've been here since episode 1 or you just found the podcast today, I am so glad you're here. And before we begin, just a quick reminder that I'm sharing my own lived experience. So, this podcast isn't intended to diagnose or replace medical advice. So today I wanted to talk a bit about masking. So if you've ever reached the end of the day and you look at everyone else and wonder how on earth they're still functioning, when you feel like your tank is on empty, then you are not alone. If you're anything like me, especially when I'm at work, I force myself to spend a lot of the day smiling, making conversation even when I don't want to, and doing everything that I'm supposed to do just to look like I had everything together. But then as soon as I get home, I pretty much just collapse out of exhaustion. And if you felt like that before, then today's episode is for you. Before my diagnosis, I didn't really hear the word masking much. And even when I first got my diagnosis, I didn't really understand masking or unmasking super well. But because I've done so much reading and so much self-discovery, I have a much better understanding of masking now. Masking is essentially when we either consciously or unconsciously hide parts of ourselves in order to fit into the world around us. So for some people, that might look like copying the way in which other people speak or forcing eye contact even when you don't want to because it's what's socially accepted. Maybe you laugh at jokes that you don't really understand, but everyone else is laughing, so you kind of have to laugh along as well. Or you might be in a really noisy environment and you actually feel physical pain from that, but you force yourself to stay there because that's what everyone else is doing. So from my journey, I have come to understand that masking for me wasn't something that I ever decided to do. It was just a behavior that I slowly learned over many years of my life. And I think especially being a woman, girls are much more likely to learn masking behaviors when they're younger because we have a lot more pressure to conform to societal normities. And I never ever realized that I was doing it until a while after I was diagnosed and I started looking into everything and sort of doing a lot of self-reflection. I actually couldn't believe that I had been doing it for my entire life and I never knew. I think that sometimes when we hear the word masking, we can think that people are deliberately hiding parts of themselves, or maybe they're pretending to be someone else. But that has never been what it's felt like to me. And I think that would probably be the same for a lot of people too who are late diagnosed. Kind of, for me in my own experience, masking was sort of just like turning down the volume on all the parts of myself that didn't fit into the world around me. I ignored a lot of the signals that my brain and body were telling me. So I get very overwhelmed by noise, but I would force myself to be in situations where I felt uncomfortable because it was expected of me. I never really asked questions because I learned that people didn't like it when you ask questions, especially when they were giving you instructions. Even if they thought they had given you clear instructions, they were actually super vague. But I think at the core of my masking was just me wanting to belong and wanting to fit in to the world around me. Masking is a survival mechanism. So there are a lot of people out there that do it, and they do it subconsciously. They do it without even knowing that they're doing it, and that's the craziest part about masking, I feel. And a really interesting thing about masking is that it actually does work, because if we actually spoke to the people around us, they would tell us how well we're coping, but they would have no idea what was behind all of that. You know, the constant self-monitoring and second-guessing and just replaying conversations for hours after they happened. And then you've got the mental checklist running in the background, making sure you're making enough eye contact, making sure you're speaking enough, you're speaking at the right volume, you're speaking at the right speed. Are you standing too close to these people? Making sure your facial expressions are matching whatever's expected of you, right? Imagine doing that all day, every second of your day. I think that's why it's so common for people, especially late diagnosed women, to find out that they're neurodivergent after they hit burnout, because ultimately that is what comes after so much masking. But burnout is a whole other conversation. But I think we hit that burnout stage and just that exhaustion feeling because our brain has been doing so much in so many ways that other people around us just don't see because it all happens internally. Interestingly enough, teaching was actually the place where masking happened most for me. And I was never pretending that I didn't like my job, because I definitely do. I spent a lot of time masking, pretending to be someone that I thought everyone else around me wanted me to be and expected me to be. I was always very aware of appearing professional, and that is what really drove my masking. And I just worked really, really hard to make sure nobody saw the struggles, the chaos that was happening in my mind when I was appearing super calm from the outside. And a really ironic thing is, I was always complimented for being calm. When I went for my first teaching interview, I had the manager tell me that I had a really calm presence, and so I'd be really good with the under 2-year-olds. And it's just funny to look back now and realize how much I was masking. I think the best way I could describe masking is like an invisible effort, because there's so much effort behind it, but nobody ever sees it. But for my entire life, I felt like I had to do it because I needed to work hard to fit in. And for a lot of people, they spend their whole lives trying to blend in, and it really just doesn't feel like a choice, and it just becomes normal. I think that's one of the hardest parts about masking, because you really don't realize that you're doing it, and you do it for so long. I do just want to point out that adapting yourself to a situation is very different from masking. So, adapting yourself to a situation might be you speaking very differently when you're at a job interview versus when you're at home, or you speaking very differently at work versus to your friends. That is adapting to a situation. It is not masking. Masking is very, very different. Masking is when the effort never stops. You are constantly monitoring yourself and asking yourself questions in the background. It's kind of like having a little commentator in your head that's analyzing every single interaction you're having while you're still having the interaction. And you can imagine how exhausting that would become. And as I say, I never knew that I was doing it. And it wasn't until a while after my diagnosis that I'd done a lot of self-reflection, I realized I was actually masking. I think once I had that ability to recognize it, I started noticing it everywhere in my life. And I still catch myself doing it to this day. I will leave a situation and I'll be like, oh my gosh, I was just copying a script from that TV show. I just still can't believe I do these things without meaning to, because it's been so ingrained in me. And it was because I just learned over many, many years what version of myself made other people feel comfortable. And that's exactly what masking is. Masking is to help those around you feel comfortable. It's not to make yourself feel comfortable. And that's what's so tiring about it, because you're spending all your energy making sure the people around you are comfortable with your behavior. I have a question that I would like you to reflect on as well. Have you ever rehearsed a conversation before making a phone call? And to elaborate on that a little bit more, it could be practicing what you're going to say or practicing the answers to questions that haven't even been asked yet, because you don't even know what questions they're going to ask. You just need to make sure you have the options there anyway. That is just one very tiny example, but there are lots of different situations where similar kind of things can happen. So maybe you're spending a conversation worrying about how much eye contact you're making. And I do just want to point out here that I know that eye contact can be a very cultural thing, because I know in some cultures, eye contact is actually considered rude. So it really just depends what lens you're coming from here. But if you're spending a whole conversation wondering if you're making enough eye contact and you miss the whole conversation because you're thinking about that part of it. And it can also look like I said at the beginning, laughing at a joke that you don't really find funny, but everybody else is laughing. And if this sounds like you, just know that you are not alone. There are so many of us out there like this. But it's also important to remember that Not everybody who is autistic or ADHD will mask, and not everybody will mask in the same way as well. It's so different for everyone, and some people are aware that they're doing it, and some people don't realize. So I never realized I was doing it for a long, long time. Now I can recognize that I do it, but it's not normally until after the situation's done that I reflect on it and then realize. So I'm still kind of learning to have that awareness as it's happening. So if you don't understand my experience, that's totally fine. I just want to validate that it looks different for everyone. And I want to remind you that being neurodivergent doesn't mean that we have this one checklist where everything has to be identical, because that is literally the beauty of being neurodivergent. As humans, we are all neurodiverse and we all have a different way of experiencing the world. So even if two people are neurodivergent, it doesn't mean that they're going to experience things in the same way. So I do just want to remind you as I talk about my experience, because these are my experiences. But I do also want to make people feel validated as well. I also think that my understanding of masking and unmasking has helped my teaching practice, because the more I'm aware of myself and the way that my brain works and what I'm doing, the more I'm actually able to take it into my teaching practice. A lot of the time, I actually now reflect on what I think the experience might be for the child rather than focusing on behavior. It's been a really big shift for me as a teacher. And just from expanding my own understanding about myself, it's actually trickled down into my practice. And I just think that's been really important, because children also learn to mask. It's a very natural thing for humans to want to fit into the world around them. And children are very aware of everything that's going on. And they do mask as well, which is something I think we forget sometimes. A really hard part about masking, though, is when you realize you've been doing it for so long that you don't actually know where the mask stops and you begin. And I think I had this experience after my diagnosis, and I'm still trying to figure out where the mask ends and where I begin. And I think it's a really confronting realization to have. I spent so many years of my life trying to fit into whatever context I'm in, and to try and figure out who you are without the mask is really, really hard, especially when you haven't spent much time without the mask. So that's where we come into unmasking. And that's when I realized that what I was doing when I was masking was to benefit other people and make them feel comfortable. And by doing that, I was really ignoring all of the things that I needed. So it's been a really hard journey trying to figure out what I actually need. And it's still really hard to figure it out as well. And I actually think one of the really hard parts for me about unmasking is the more that I'm doing it, the more I'm finding I'm not able to tolerate things. So for me, sound is a really, really big trigger. And I'm noticing when I go into a cafe or a restaurant now, and there's a lot of music, and when there's echoing of people's conversations, I really, really struggle. And I'm finding now that I need a lot more supports in situations like that. Whereas before, I would have just been able to white knuckle through it. And now I feel like I can't even do that anymore. So that's been something that I've found quite challenging, because it almost feels like regression of skills, which is also another really common thing after diagnosis. But because I've spent so many years under the mask, trying to figure out a way of being with my unmasked self is a bit of a challenge. Sometimes it's disheartening because I feel like I can't do the things that I used to do, which makes no sense because I used to do them, right? But I think that's been one of the grief points about my unmasking. One thing I have learned since my unmasking is that I need so much more rest than I was ever giving myself before. I do think in the past my body and brain were kind of screaming out to me that I needed rest, but I kind of ignored it. And this happened so many times until I hit a really bad burnout stage. I think my first bout of burnout took me at least a few years to recover from. So I need to be very careful about avoiding that cycle again. Even though I do get upset because I feel like I can't do the same things I used to, I also know that it's really important not to push myself to mask when I don't have the capability, because I know that I will end up in severe burnout, and I just know how long and how much effort it actually takes to bounce back from that. And I don't know, I'm sure that other people feel the same way, but I feel really guilty for resting a lot of the time. That's still something that I need to change with my mindset because I've always felt like I needed to earn rest. Something that is good to remember though is if we say to ourselves, we can only rest after we do everything on this to-do list, for example. But the reality is that list is never ever going to be done. None of our to-dos are ever going to be done because we still have to keep going to work. We'll always have washing to do. We'll always have dishes to do, The to-do list is never ever going to end. So if we say to ourselves we can only rest when it's done, we will literally keep going forever until we die. So the idea that rest needs to be earned is really stupid when we think about it. And I am definitely guilty of comparing myself to other people as well. When I see other people being able to do so much and I feel like I can only do one thing before I'm completely drained. But we kind of have to think about it like a battery, right? When we run out of energy, we need to recharge ourselves. And we all have different battery capacities. And that's okay. Unmasking is also a really interesting thing because I think sometimes people think when we say unmasking, they think it's like a huge change that happens all at once. And it's really not, at least in my own experience, it hasn't been like that for me at all. For me, it's been really slow progress and slow change over time. And as I say, I am struggling with it in some ways because I feel like my capability is decreasing, but it's important to listen to what your brain and body are wanting to do naturally. And I know that when we first figure out that we're masking and we're wanting to unmask, it can be really confusing to know how to even start. And it can be quite scary and intimidating because we don't know what's going to happen. But I just want to say that for me, it wasn't like a big dramatic change. And it definitely still has its challenging moments. But I think that me existing as my unmasked self is better than me masking. And unmasking can look really small. It can be things like actually asking yourself if you want to go out and do this thing. And if you don't, saying no. Like that's a really small thing we can do. Or wearing noise cancelling headphones or loop earplugs. I will say I don't like the feel of loop earplugs in my ear, but because noise is such a sensitive thing for me, I am starting to force myself to wear them because I'm struggling so much with the sound. I've also stopped forcing myself to make eye contact when I don't feel comfortable. And I mean, there are people where I'm more comfortable doing this with than others. So it really just depends. But my point is that unmasking doesn't have to be super dramatic. It can be really tiny things and they can make a huge difference. So another thing that I do a lot now is I wear sunglasses everywhere because again, I hate the bright lights, especially I never go into malls. I used to force myself to go into a mall when I needed something. Now I just don't do it because again, unmasking. I don't want to do it. But I wear sunglasses pretty much everywhere now. And all of these things don't seem big and significant. But when you do all of these little things together, they actually make a huge difference. Again, it's important to remember that the reason why we mask is to make people around us feel comfortable. So actually unmasking is just helping ourselves feel more comfortable. And even though it's really, really hard to stop worrying about the people around us, we really need to put ourselves first in this situation and ask ourselves what we need and what will make us feel safe. And just in case anyone is confused, I will be honest and say that unmasking isn't something I do everywhere. There's still environments where I have to be extremely professional, and that is totally normal. I think we all have these situations in life where we just have to do it. But there are situations in which I've allowed myself to unmask more, particularly with my friends, because we don't need to add the extra pressure on ourselves when it really doesn't need to be there. So I think a really good way to start the unmasking process is through self-reflection. It's really important to ask yourself questions, whether that's throughout the day or at the end of the day, but just constantly checking in with yourself and making sure when you're in situations that you're not just doing things to make others feel comfortable, but asking yourselves what you can do for yourself to make yourself feel comfortable. It could help by asking where in your life you feel safest being at the moment. It could be with your friend or your partner, or it doesn't even have to be with people. It could be when you're at home alone or you're doing your favorite hobby. And if you thought of a place right away, that's amazing. But if you didn't think of anything, that's totally fine. It's just something to keep in mind. Sometimes being able to figure that out does take a lot of time. I know it's taken me a long time, probably like a year to figure that out. But just keeping that question in the back of your mind, I think we all deserve to have a space where we feel totally safe and where we can just be. And just remembering that you don't have to take the mask off all at once. It can happen in really small, slow stages. And if you're feeling confused about how to even start that process, in my experience, it starts from reflection and just asking yourself questions. I think just having that awareness is really important. But before we head off today, I have a few little reflections that I would like to just sprinkle in here. I have another question that I would like you to ponder, and that is, where in your life do you feel like you can completely exhale? You know, the place where you feel like you don't have to perform and where you feel genuinely safe to be yourself. Just something to hang on to and be curious. And with that, I would also like to say that as teachers, I know that we spend a lot of time helping children feel safe, because we know that children learn best when they are safe and they feel understood and valued for who they are. But the thing that I would like to push back on here is, how do we actually create those same conditions for adults? So for our teachers. I actually did ask this question a while back on the early childhood discussion page, and the answers were just not it. It was really clear to me that it wasn't something that people had thought about before, and there was such little understanding as well. And I really just couldn't believe that. So that's another thing that I've been pondering. But thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I'm really grateful that you've chosen to spend this part of your day with me. And if today's conversation has resonated with you, I'd love if you followed That AuDHD Teacher on whatever podcast platform you listen to. And if you have a moment to leave a rating or a review, it genuinely helps me so much, because I want as many people as possible to discover these conversations. And if you would like to continue the conversation, you can find me on Instagram and TikTok at That AuDHD Teacher, where I try and share more about my life and behind the scenes. If someone came to mind while you were listening to today's episode, please do share it with them, because sometimes it just helps knowing that we're not alone. But until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and remember, different doesn't mean broken, it simply means different. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode.